Hey, Shefali, welcome to Let's Grow Young.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to chat.
Yes, and I'm excited to actually have you on here. I have to admit, I have been stalking you for some while on your socials, on your Facebook and various biohacking groups. And these groups have thousands and tens of thousands of people on there. And so the art of spotting someone who could become a guest on the podcast is less scientific and more intuition, if I'm honest. And when I saw your posts on there, I thought, that lady seems interesting. I like those posts. So from that moment, look, I'm guilty. I was stalking you, and I thought I'm gonna research this lady
Hey, yeah,
and
I believe in transparency and vulnerability and I think it's so easy to like hone in on some of these people's questions in those groups and just answer their question, which, that's what you're supposed to do, but I have such a big picture view that I can't help but talk about it.
yeah, no, it's amazing. Now, um, I tend to start my podcast a bit differently than most, and what I want to ask you to do is, in about 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be finished. Um, what are the key things that I think are going to resonate, or what are the key messages, two or three messages that you think people will walk away with at the end of this interview?
Oh, well, it kind of depends on what questions you ask me, but some of my messaging is uh, don't ignore your gut health data and be data. I think another message I like to really bring home is that data and input really drive behavior change and awareness, or just drive behavior change, really. Like the idea of arm yourself with as much knowledge as you can, empower the patient, empower yourself, but with that, use the rapport that you have with your provider, um, and gain trust. Like you want to trust your provider too at the same time.
Superb. You've actually used two things which are very close to me at the moment: gut health and data. And I've got an issue with the way data is being forced onto people at the moment. But we're going to come back to that because
Sounds
I
good.
think because we've just started with the conclusion, I think we'll do this properly now and start
Okay.
at the start. And so, um, Shefaly Ravula, usually people like me would start introducing you to say who you are, but it's better it comes from you. Who are you? What do you do?
Absolutely. I am a trained medical provider. I'm a physician assistant, been a board certified PA for 25 years. And what I do is I have 10 years of 10 to 15 years of conventional allopathic GI experience, in a regular mainstream conventional practice, which had a lot of challenges in the sense of what I wanted to offer people in an insurance model, just because, you know, we're tied by a lot of things, tied up. And then I have 10 years of culinary medicine, culinary nutrition experience. And then what I did is I married the two together. I was like, wait, this is what I want to bring to the GI practice, but I can't. So I brought the two together and we opened Precision Gut Health a couple of years ago. It initially was called Precision Metabolic Health, but since it's such a long name, it's shortened to Gut Health. And gut and metabolism are so tied together in most people that is, and we know this now with the GLP-1. We know that's key in metabolic health. Um, so that's what I do. I bridge the gap between conventional gastroenterology and modern gut health, and we do a lot of health optimization going forward, but we do try to fix the gut first.
Okay. Now, just for people who don't understand, including me,
Yes.
what is allopathic GI?
Yeah, great. Sorry. So allopathic means that conventional way of getting trained here in the United States. It's usually medical school, or the advanced practice providers go to PA school, which is physician assistant, like graduate programs, or there are nurse practitioners that are trained in the nursing model that end up being medically designated as advanced practice providers as well. So these are people in the conventional medicine model. We're trained in just like, just like a medical physician would be, in that medical model, which is uh, has some limitations, but also has obviously some significant benefits that should not be disregarded. So that's what allopathic is. And then GI is gastroenterology. Yeah, gastroenterology. It should be
Okay.
GE, I guess. Gastroenterology health. I'm not sure. GI. I
There you
should
go.
know
I'm
that.
glad I asked you the question. I'm glad I asked you the question. So
Oh,
I
I
guess
know. It's gastrointestinal. That's what it is.
super. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you cleared that up because
Yeah.
my my wife is a doctor. I guess she's an allopathic GI practitioner herself. She's a family doctor, as you call them in the
Okay.
US,
Okay.
and so she would have taken that as a quiz question to understand
That's
what is the
right.
I in the
That's right.
GI. Rather than kind of talk about this over breakfast and dinner, I'm glad you've just cleared it up.
Yes, yes. And of course,
Okay.
here if you're a gastroenterologist, you have to have significant advanced training and fellowship in the field of gastroenterology.
Okay. Now, got that. And then you mentioned that you're also looking at, for the last 10 years, culinary nutrition.
Yeah,
Tell me more about that.
absolutely.
Obviously, I know what culinary means. I know what nutrition means. But in regards to how you look at it and how it's come into your life, talk
Yeah.
to me about that.
So the way culinary and nutrition go together is, so if you think about a chef that's teaching cooking classes or cooking in a restaurant or anyone in that food industry that's an educator, they're maybe writing recipes, they may be teaching how to cook, they may be cooking, they may be catering. So that's the culinary piece. And then you have the nutrition piece. And there are different fields in nutrition. There's dietitians and traditional dietetics, or there's other types of nutrition trainings and degrees in the United States, at least. And nutritionists will, often focus on the science of nutrition. So thinking about very basics like macros, like protein, carbs, and fats, but certainly much more beyond that. I'm not a trained dietitian. I did not go to dietetic school. I learned for years self-taught back when my story, when my dad had a heart attack about 20 years ago, and I started studying in Dr. Andrew Weil's program, who's an integrative physician, and integrative medicine here has a lot of components of nutrition. Um, so that's kind of where my journey began. But just to answer your question, so that's nutrition. And so when I bring the two together, what I'm doing is when I'm teaching people cooking or writing a recipe, I'm bringing in the nutrition piece into it. So, we have the Food as Medicine Academy for our patients, and those are recorded classes where, for example, let's say I talk about beets. So I'm going to teach about beets in the sense of, okay, how to source them, how to prepare them, what recipes are really tasty with them, how you can make them delicious and incorporate them into your, meal planning. But what sets it apart is that then we talk about the phytonutrients in beets, how they impact your biochemistry, what they might do for your cardiovascular health. So that's where it's married together.
Super, super. I'm so glad you mentioned "Let food be thy medicine" because we're talking about food, we're talking about medicine, and when we kind of agreed to come onto the podcast, I thought I hope she says "Let food be thy medicine" because
Yeah.
that's the Hippocrates quote, and I absolutely love that quote. And so one of the questions I was going to have for you was, do you now see food as the primary source of medicine when your secondary world, it's maybe not even your secondary world, your culinary world comes into an overlap with your primary physician world? Um, how do you play that conflict between traditional medicine and integrative medicine? I mentioned earlier my wife is a traditional doctor,
Hmm.
but I think she's now getting convinced that integrative medicine is actually the way forward. and she wants to retrain into integrative medicine. And
Yes.
so it sounds like you've been on this journey around medication versus food. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I think food was the original medicine. We have multiple cultures around the world for centuries using that as our original medicine, right? So plant healers, herbal medicine, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine. What happened, in my opinion, is we got modernized and we got convenienced. We're in the convenience culture, and we've really caused a lot of damage to our bodies. And we continue to raise our children that way. So they are still going to continue to be adults like us, most of them, where food may not be enough as their initial medicine to get them out of a particular disease state. So what I mean is, if you've got pretty significant chronic illness, and that can be simply prediabetes alone, just prediabetes alone is a chronic state of illness. You have gotten to that point over many years, most likely, and it will continue to follow into insulin resistance, diabetes, etc. But over a long period of time, maybe. So any chronic illness, it's reversible, but sometimes that food first approach might not be enough. It can be, but it just will take longer, I think. And then if you've got some gut health issues, whether you've got gas or bloating or intestinal permeability, which is the nicer way of saying leaky gut, where or you've got dysbiosis where your microbiome's out of whack. That multiple reasons for all of these things can happen. Simply the standard American diet, simply getting on multiple antibiotics, simply having food poisoning and not it going the right direction. These things can impact your gut health and gut absorption of your nutrients. And so sometimes addressing just a food first approach initially is not fast enough for some people. But for some of my patients, that's the way we go. It just takes its time.
Okay. You mentioned a lot of words there, which I'm very familiar with. You mentioned leaky gut microbiome, which I do want to come back to, because I think for the viewers, they're really important things to understand. But whilst we continue to focus on nutrition, when it comes to putting together a healthy plate, what would you advise people? Now, look, people will say proteins, carbohydrates, trace minerals, macros, micros, for X amount plant-based, amino acids, etc., etc.
Right.
How do you go about making that assessment around what would work for your average patient? Because there's a lot of generics out there.
There are.
And how do you go about customizing solutions for
Yeah.
your patients?
Okay. I love that I love these questions because I want your audience to be thinking that there is no one general patient. We don't recommend any one diet in our practice. We really ideally want to personalize it to the person, to their labs, to their culture, to their family, to their family history. What's in their family history? What are they at risk for? What are their current diagnoses and medications? What are their philosophies in terms of staunchly vegan or staunchly carnivore? What are their gut health issues? If there's none, that's great. Then we have a little bit, easier time to work with in terms of the other things. Now, from a public health policy perspective, and I'm obviously not an expert in this, but I'm very aware of the fact that when we personalize nutrition, it can be expensive because we're doing tests and these, biohacking things and looking at, body composition and stuff. But if you were to ask me for the general patient, then we have to look at the studies. And we have to see that in the studies, we see that the Mediterranean diet seems to be the best benefit. But for what goal, right? So if we know that heart disease is the number one killer in the world of men and women, and I'm speaking generally, then that's what I'm going to have to go with. I have to go with that statistic. And that means like most people might benefit from that because simply statistically, that's what we're going to die of. But it's so much, you know what I mean? It has to be personalized because I do have that patient that has no family history of heart disease, that has no, they have a negative calcium score. Their LDL's, not bad, and their ApoB is perfect. So that person can maybe do it something else because it just kind of depends on whether they have other struggles. And that does happen in our practice. We don't have patients that their first goal is uh, having to reverse their cardiovascular risk reduction because they're already there. So then they have other issues that we might have to work on, like thyroid or gut health or menopause. So, and then age matters, right? So when you asked about, lately people are talking about protein, it's gotten really trendy. Yes, absolutely. And the reason is because, well, we're getting old, we're living longer. Women are entering menopause, and understanding the World Health Initiative study that has been parts of it have been debunked, and understanding that menopause needs to be treated, and understanding that longevity is for women includes treating perimenopause and menopause. And so age matters. So if you are asking about protein, well, I need to know your age. I need to know your gender. I need to know your hormone status. Are you in andropause? Are you in menopause? All of these things matter too, in addition to those other factors I mentioned.
Okay, that's superb. I think I'm not going to do menopause an injustice by
Yes.
just skating, but by skating over it over 60 seconds. I'd love to get you back, maybe with a live audience where we talk about the menopause and nutrition. So I'm going to move away from that,
Yes.
only because I want to give it the respect and time that it should be given.
I think
Um,
it's a smart idea. It needs its whole other hour.
and we don't have that today with busy
No.
families right now, but we will come back to that. No, what's actually quite interesting there from what you mentioned is that I've recently completed my lifestyle medicine certifications. Um, you talked about aging, you talked about philosophy, you talked about cultures, family history. I think you're getting at genetics and epigenetics, and where we have nutrition as one pillar. What do you say to the guy who's got a really, really strict diet, eats really well, but in fact all the other pillars are out of sync? How do you talk to people who are eating well, but actually maybe drink a bit too much, don't
Uh,
sleep very well, or maybe don't exercise much? How do these pillars play together?
yeah. Okay, so you're asking the question about the healthy eater,
Yeah,
but the other lifestyle pillars they're not checking the boxes on those. So, and
correct.
how I talk to them. Okay,
Yeah.
so well, if they're seeking my attention, then they have something going on. Either they saw something in their labs or they actually feel badly, right? About whether they're too tired or, you know, have workout recovery issues, or there's some symptom that's
Sorry, yeah, yeah, sorry. Let me just rephrase that
okay.
question because
Okay.
I think I've explained it incorrectly. Um, what would you say to the guy or lady who is following a superb nutritional routine, but actually is not actually focusing on many of the other pillars?
Okay, so I would explain to them how, stress shows up in your labs, or it can. Stress shows up on your heart rate variability monitor. Stress shows up in your breath. So matching the lifestyle that you're talking about, so the stress or the sleep or the movement, to objective data. That is what I mean by data driving behavior change. So put on a Whoop, or put on an Oura ring, or get your Apple tracker, or do the chronometer analysis, whatever it is, that is what I help people do. And then they're like, wow, that's my blood, or that's my, or sometimes we'll do genetic testing, like you just alluded to. Wow, that's my DNA. I didn't know I was susceptible to that. Okay, so I can either suppress these genes using these tools, or I can further express these genes using these tools. So honestly, the answer is showing them how in their body what's happening. Now, we could be proven wrong. Absolutely. So we could see that the genetics are showing such and such pattern, but their blood work doesn't show it, and they're actually good. That's an example of me a few years ago. I had genetics that showed a propensity for insulin resistance, and high cholesterol. Those were kind of the top two pathways in the report I use. And so I matched it to my labs, and my labs, like, I do very, very comprehensive labs, very much like all those biohackers. That's what we do in our practice. Full panel, lots of blood. And never treat one number, right? You need to just look for trends. So I had seen my trends, and I'm like, I don't have any insulin resistance. I don't have any cholesterol problems. Like, I looked at it with with a magnifying glass. So it didn't match. So my genes were saying that I have a propensity to it, but it didn't match. And now you might think, well, maybe she had the lifestyle measures in place to tamp down those genes. Well, I did. That may be it. But again, then I went through a perimenopausal change, and now, last year, we were seeing that those genes were not being suppressed enough. So I have to work harder on my lifestyle now.
Okay. Okay. So
I don't know if that answered your question.
it does. I mean, there's only one answer to the question. I think it's you can eat really well, but if you're drinking half a bottle of wine every day, or 10 cigarettes or e-vapes, it's useless. And so,
Right.
and I personally think it goes back to the connotations of the word diet. People have taken diet to mean restriction, anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to cut out carbohydrates, and they start getting anxious. They're missing the carbohydrate. They're going to cut out chocolate rather than just have it maybe on a Friday, and they get anxious. But diet actually means a way of life. And
I
know
call
it's very
diet a
easy.
4-letter bad word.
I 100% agree. 100% agree.
And so I tried to
Anything,
change the name, in all our practice. Like, instead of trying to put the word diet, I call it a food plan. But even
yeah,
that's very, didactic. So, ultimately, I like, my goal is to get people to enjoy food again, food is such a vital part of community and joy. Now, there are some people, I have patients that are like, I really don't care what I eat. I'm not a foodie. Just tell me what to eat and I'm going to eat it. I don't really particularly, I only eat to survive. I don't, that's a small minority of people. So those are questions to be asking. I ask these questions like, what role does food play for you in your life? It could be a source of anxiety, a source of trauma, a source
mm,
of complete confusion. It could be a source of joy. There's a lot of things that food, that you're alluding to, that I agree with. Yeah.
super. Because to me, seriously, I don't use the word diet, and I see food as a way of life. And a way of life for me is, yes, I have times where I do my intermittent fast, but generally I'll eat, and I'll eat properly, and I'll enjoy it. And I think I don't like the anxiety that the word diet gives people.
It really does. It really does. Yeah. And so we really strive to help people enjoy food again in
Yeah.
a really holistic way, because it is really part of, this is the blue zones. They talk about that a lot. All these communities, and even the science of happiness. Like, we're talking about community and being at the dinner table together,
Mm.
and friendships and family. Those are important things that are not necessarily worth giving up. Now, if you need that restrictive food plan to get you to a place of baseline. So I had a patient yesterday. She was able to eat all her normal foods that she usually enjoyed for the last 30 years. And then all of a sudden, in the spring, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm bloated, I'm distended. And she experimented on her own, and she ended up becoming very restricted on her diet because
Mm.
she would try the other things and they would give her GI problems. Well, this is very short term. She's not going to have
Yeah.
to be on that way of
Yeah.
eating after she's done with our program.
By the way, I'm absolutely loving this conversation because my script has gone out the window, and we're just enjoying a very decent discussion. It's interesting you mentioned the blue zones, because I've been given the blue zones a lot of thought recently, and Dan Buettner's documentary and books about this. And I'm coming to the conclusion that it's not fair to always keep referring to the blue zones. Now, what I mean by this is the theory of the blue zones and the practice is 100% correct. You've got people in Sardinia walking up hills at the age of 70, bringing
Yeah.
their cattle up and down. You have people in Japan who are living feng shui world and eating really healthily. But guess what? I live in London. You live in Texas. You
Right.
got people living in New York. We have mortgages to pay. We live in an environment which has been polluted.
Right.
So to me, it's almost becoming unfair that the reference point is becoming the blue zones, because cost of living, the pressure of living has totally, utterly changed.
Yes.
And so that's why the stuff that you're doing to educate people, I think, is so vital and so critical, and people should be downloading your recipes and talking to people like you, because I think that there's a bridge between the blue zones and the current world.
And what we have
My,
now. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and
I usually reference the blue zones as 10 on the scale of 1 to 10 of like ideally where you want to be health wise in
mm,
nature, using your body to work on the day to day life and having community. It's not even about the food necessarily. It's, and of course, all those zones, they had one, they never really pointed out any one food in any one place. So it's not about that. But I do think it's this, I agree. It's an ideology. And uh, I live in the middle of urban Texas, and there are so many things in my journey that I want to get to at that point. But I'm not there yet. Like I need to learn how to garden and things like that first in
mm,
my own. But I do have patients that do all those things, farm on their land in rural Texas, in like the country in Texas.
yeah,
And they come see me. We're a virtual practice, so we can see everybody in Texas. And they're in sunshine, getting the vitamin D, using their glutes and their larger muscle groups to do the
mm,
work in their farms and grow the vegetables and then eat them and prepare them. That's a full-time job, right? Like we can't all do that. So
yeah.
there, it's just this, we want to keep that vision in mind and try to like incorporate small things every year or every 6 months. I started finally riding my bike places rather than taking my car, like small things, it matters.
It does. It does. An example that I've used in London, having researched the blue zones in Japan, for breakfast 3 times a week now, I have natto
Oh,
with
wow.
with natto with brown rice, mackerel, and miso soup with seaweed in it. And someone may say, "Listen to this idiot. He must have loads of money." Well, I don't. The fact is, we live in a world where the internet is there, and I can get natto delivered to me for £2.50,
Yeah,
and the rice you can buy from an organic shop and put it
absolutely.
into your rice cooker. Seaweed you just throw in there, and miso soup is quite easy, and mackerel is available. So I would say that one plate of breakfast like that costs me probably £4,
Right.
which is less than a vanilla latte, yeah, at Starbucks, right?
Yes, yes.
So
So and forget, so let's just think for a second how much it costs. Yeah, it doesn't cost too much to cook your own meals. Even if you choose some things organic. Some meats are going to be expensive.
mm,
Certainly all those, but it's still, when you add up the cost, it's still less than going out to eat, and even going out to eat at a nice restaurant. At a nice restaurant where they're not using great quality ingredients, even at the nicest restaurants, right? They're not using grass fed, pasture raised ingredients. They're not using extra virgin olive oil. It's a restaurant. So, where was I going with this? I had a point. Okay, it'll come back to me.
No
Oh,
worries. We can come back at any
oh, I was
point.
thinking, okay, we hired a personal chef for 1 week, this in the last 6 months, and the cost was high, and but she shopped where I wanted her to shop, and she used my oils and spices and things that I wanted to. And when I did a calculation experiment, and I calculated the price of all the meals, and they weren't cheap. It was more than a Chipotle meal, but less than a meal at, you know, I don't know, Flower Child. We don't have the same restaurants as each other, but you know, it's sometimes you have to really think that and do a cost comparison and look for quality ingredients. If you're not able to cook at home, there are tools and resources out there.
I agree. I agree. Now, other things I'd like to ask you about is the whole debate around plants and what proportion of your food should be plant based.
Yeah.
Is the amino acid profile the same? There's so many fights on socials about this, and I think I've got my thoughts on it, but it'd be great to hear an expert's thoughts on plants versus protein source from other places.
Yeah, for sure. So plant like vegan, like strictly plant-based diets, or do you mean just the protein?
Um, Not necessarily vegan. I'm going to come to vegan,
Okay.
but just general vegetarian food
Uh-huh.
compared to sorry, the amount of protein that can be taken from plant-based materials, not necessarily vegan, compared to what you can source from a carnivore meal,
Yeah.
and the profile of the structure of those proteins.
Yeah. Okay. So there are various experts that discuss this on the biohacking podcast. So even Peter Attia was stumped by somebody he had on in January that discussed this at length in terms of leucine, which was one of the main amino acids responsible for muscle protein synthesis. So I have a recorded class in the Food is Medicine Academy that explains 100 grams of plant-based protein and 100 grams of animal protein and how to do that in a day. And we go into some of this in those classes. But generally, the thought is that it is very hard to get the amount of leucine you need for muscle protein synthesis in a plant-based protein only, but it's
What
doable.
is leucine? What is leucine?
Leucine, leucine, is a amino acid responsible, kind of highly responsible for muscle protein synthesis. And I have to definitely disclose that I'm no expert on leucine. There's like a leucine expert. There's several of them. I want to say Daniel Lehman, and I can't remember
Hmm.
the other guy that was on recently in January on Peter's podcast
Hmm.
that went through this in quite by like a lot of biochemistry details. So, but for generally what I say is, okay, if you're a staunch vegetarian, just know that you're going to have to work harder and ideally measure it. You can measure leucine and other amino acids when you do a 3-day free chronometer food tracking app. And you can measure all your nutrients and just do that. We have a link on our website on how to get that app. I think you get a longer trial if you use that. But and we do offer a service where we can do a formal analysis and give you a meal plan based on what we found in terms of what you're deficient in or what you're too much in. But it's
Hmm.
a easy free tool to figure out. Like I said, I'm matching the objective with what you think. You've got to get data to really know. You don't know what you don't know.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing you say is that the amino acid profile from plants is different to that from source from animals, and
In terms of, you have to have a lot of that protein amount to get, you can do it. It's just that you have to have a lot of it. And it's
okay,
and so
and
when you have a lot of that, you have to think, okay, so Um, let's say quinoa for an example, and I don't remember this offhand. There's a great chart, but let's say you have a cup or two, a cup of quinoa, cooked quinoa, maybe 1.5 cups. So that has a great amount of protein, but it also is pretty hefty in carbohydrates. Now,
Yeah.
who's against carbohydrates? I'm not. I'm not against anything, as you can tell. I hope I've made that very clear. Our bottom line is we are diet agnostic here. We work with all diets because it's doable. It's just more work in some areas. But that level of carbohydrates may not be good for somebody who's already inching towards insulin resistance, or who's having post-workout fatigue, or who has sleep disorders. We've got to nail down that insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation, you know, if you're going to want to have that much carbohydrate.
Yeah, got it. So you can get the right amino acid profile through vegetables, but you've just got to eat a hell of a lot more. Some of that may come in the form of too much carbohydrates. I eat plenty of carbs. I'm not one of these anti-carb people.
Yeah, me too.
But by eating too many carbs, it will affect your insulin levels and potentially, your blood sugar levels, and they can have side effects and ailments because of that. So I think you're actually saying that you probably need amino acid supplements if you're on a pure
If you're
vegetarian meal.
staunch vegetarian, you will benefit from some kind of protein powder.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and possibly branched chain amino acids. Yes.
Yes. Are you vegetarian?
No.
Okay.
I'm an omnivore. I eat everything.
Hey, same here. Same here.
And
I've
yeah,
got.
I mean, that
I've,
may change. Let's say I have some GI issue that comes up in a couple of years. Let's say I get hospitalized for whatever. Let's say menopause doesn't go in the right direction for me. These things change, and so my diet may have to change short term for various things.
yeah.
But right now, and for most of my life, I've been an omnivore. And I do pay attention to the amounts of things. So,
Yeah.
like the amounts of the macros, particularly the 4 macros. And then I do pay attention to my micronutrients too.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned on my course at Harvard, and I know I'm going to get shot about this when I talk about this, and people are going to leave me lots of messages saying, "What a fool!" I learned how dangerous some vegetables are, and I
Mm,
actually learned how dangerous some plants are. I learned about leptins, and I learned about the
right.
toxic poisons. I learned about why certain plants, like the ones in my garden, can survive in very difficult temperatures and conditions, and why they can get rid of insects and spiders on them because they have certain poisons to spray at them.
Right.
So for me, I went quite in depth into the fact that I was having gut issues. But
Okay.
when I got into all of this, I realized, hold on a minute, there's certain fibers that don't suit me. And there's certain vegetables which I think were laced with toxins that are used to get rid of insects and protect them that I was eating. And when I started removing them and putting more healthy vegetables into my diet, guess what? My gut issues are gone.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I actually learned that blanketly saying, like with anything, blanketly saying have more meat or blanketly saying have more vegetables without understanding the actual makeup of either of those is quite
Yes.
dangerous.
But then you have to go take it a step further and understand, why were you sensitive to that in the first place? Always
Yeah.
ask why. So, oh, I have SIBO and I'm getting treated for it. Why do you have SIBO? Oh, I have low stomach acid. Well, why do you have low stomach acid? Always go upstream and ask why.
Mm.
And you may come to a point where you don't know the answer, and that's okay. And we certainly have very limited research on some of
Okay.
this. So some of this is very anecdotal in the patient in front of me, but some of it is strongly evidence based. The whole Institute of Functional Medicine is completely evidence based. So
Yeah.
um, I guess what I would say is you should ask why. Maybe you have histamine SNPs, genetic SNPs.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't detoxing appropriately in the first place for whatever reason, because maybe you had detox SNPs, maybe you had glutathione genetic SNPs, or maybe you just had an overload of medications or alcohol, or what it might have done to causing a sluggish liver, or was your gallbladder removed? There's so many things. And so when we in functional medicine, this is back to my trajectory. I started with all this and I ended up doing functional medicine training in two places. And you're trained for hours and hours on how to create a patient timeline and a map. And you're connecting the dots in your mind from your training from preconception onwards. And all of those little things matter. And the question is always why? Why did they have this? What's the root cause?
Wow. Wow. I just think that's so obvious and so critical. People often forget that we are beings, and I'm a being of 47 years of age, and my being has had certain things put into it, which ultimately add up and led to a leaky gut for me, which I was
Yeah.
able to fix.
Yeah. So my
Look,
question to you is, do you miss those foods at all? So that would be the only,
no, well,
okay. So if you
not.
don't miss them and you don't need them from a bioactive or biochemistry perspective, and I'm thinking of certain classes of vegetables
Yeah,
or foods that are really highly bioactive that I kind of like really want most people to ultimately eat because they have so many benefits because they're like upregulators of the whole anti-inflammatory cascade.
yeah.
But if you don't miss them, then we don't have to work on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't miss them. In taking them out, I realized there were probably some nutrients that were in them. I've replaced them with other things. I come from an Indian background.
Yeah.
Vegetable food is high up on our agenda, and so, but we cook the shit out of our vegetables, if I'm honest. And so
Yeah.
we tend to overcook our vegetables. So, if anything, I've toned down the Indian cooking to make it a little bit more, keep the structure of the vegetables more stable. I've substituted what I've got rid of to keep the sources of
The
what I
nutrient. Yeah,
need.
yeah.
Right.
And that's what
Yeah.
you do. Sometimes you supplement if you feel strongly about restricting any food, any particular food group. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, there's actually loads more that I want to cover with you, and but I am also conscious of time. Well, one of the things that you said earlier was data. Right at the top, when I asked you the two things that people take away: gut health and data. Starting with data, I'm in a difficult situation with data at the moment. So my story is such that I really struggle, for example, with sleep issues. Really, really chronic sleep issues where the London School of Sleep, or Sleep Clinic it's called,
Uh-huh.
I was selected out of the entire population for about 5 people to go through a very small study. Sorry, it was
Oh,
more than
okay.
5 people. Um, I was basically told there's no solution for you,
Oh, huh.
and so I was referred to CBT, um, and I was left to think, wow, I can't go on like this. But then episode number 1 of my podcast is a lady called Lisa Butcher who actually used internal therapy called inner dance to exercise some demons that I had.
Hmm.
Through one session of that, I actually fixed my sleep. I sleep like a baby now, um,
That's amazing.
and yeah, and I can talk about that. But the whole thing about data, and you pointed to the Whoop. The reason I don't wear active monitoring stuff is well. Firstly, I do my biomarker tests every 3 to 6 months, and I
Hmm.
do my genetic aging markers,
Hmm.
um, and I've got my views on the efficacy of a lot of these epigenetic clocks. I think
Yes.
some of them
Yes.
are frankly rubbish because the algorithms are very weak and not published.
Yeah.
Um,
You're talking about on the biological clock.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also some of the blood marker testing. They send a kit to your house, etc. So we can cover that in another episode.
Okay.
But but I think when it comes to data, the reason I don't wear a Whoop, or a reason I don't wear an Aura, or a reason I don't wear a Zoe is um, I have this lifestyle which I think is I think I have a super healthy lifestyle.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to go to sleep thinking about what is the data going to tell me in the morning,
Yeah.
and I don't want to eat something and see it spike if I'm only eating that type of food occasionally.
Yes.
I think I've learned the connection between my gut and my brain.
Hmm.
I think I've started to learn what works, and not every person can do that, so they need these devices. But for me, it's I just have an issue for myself being so data driven. But
Yeah.
with people with chronic conditions, people with even acute conditions, I totally get why they need it. Now, a Whoop may tell me that I'm lacking on REM sleep, but I don't sleep well in REM sleep. I feel like I've had a nightmare or a dream that I've been part in, and I wake up and I thought, wow, that wasn't real. I get into a deep sleep and I feel
Hmm.
good. But if I was to wake up in the morning and a Whoop was to tell me you didn't sleep well, I thought, well, yes, I did, and so it would
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
make me paranoid.
No, no. So this is very personality dependent. And
Yeah,
so one of the first questions before we even do any discussions, ordering, testing is I get a feel for the person's personality and I ask them their personality. Like there's all kinds of personality questionnaires out there. Um, and I've always loved the idea of partnering with therapists in my practice because that's such an important tool as well. But the Enneagram or the Myers Briggs or whatever, finding out the type of personality, and I ask them straight up, like, are you somebody that likes a lot of data, or have you ever tracked? And if I get the sense that it makes them, um, even asked that question. I said, would this drive you bonkers? Like, would it create anxiety? We don't do it for those people. I don't want to go towards orthorexia, which is
super.
what you're referring to, I think.
No, no, I think that's amazing. I think this is where you're bringing your traditional and your alternative medicines together. I think from what I'm seeing, the code of ethics that you would have gone through as a traditional doctor, as well as the code of ethics as an integrative doctor, it really will make you think what is a patient's personality. Whereas I think there are a lot of practitioners out there who probably don't have that medical background that you have, who would just be pushing the product, right?
Yes.
Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, it's taken I think I picked that personality piece back in allopathic conventional gastroenterology. Uh some people, it's the same thing. Some people just say, "Nope, give me the Prilosec, give me the PPI, I'll be on my merry way." And some people are like, "Well, is there anything else?" I mean, there's so much we could talk about that too, with that hierarchy of like doctor, medical provider to patient, and how it really needs to be a little bit more like this,
Yeah.
rather than this. So that's a whole other conversation too. But
Okay.
yeah, I love talking with you and talking about this. So happy to come
Yes.
back. Yeah.
Yeah. Super. Now, I want to just briefly talk about my favorite subject, which is
Okay.
gut health. And
Oh yeah.
um, I've learned that my gut is actually my first brain. It's not my second brain.
Yep.
I've learned that I have this connection between the vagus nerve and my brain.
Okay.
Um, I've actually somehow, I think I'm beginning to pick up on my gut and vagus nerve signals before my brain reacts, and I never used to. I think stuff like saunas and cold plunges are playing a part in that in the whole senescent gene kind of debate. So to me, even I've even used stuff like urolithin A and,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. To me, you don't need to convert me about the importance of the gut. I believe it's hugely important. Um, and you also mentioned things that I'm aware of around the microbiome and leaky guts, but maybe just briefly, well, or as long as you want, for the audience, just explain the gut. What is it and why it is so important? And I'll put you on the spot because it's really something that you can't do briefly.
I can't do briefly. Oh my gosh, there's a whole fellowship devoted to the gut in the mainstream medical model. Um, okay, the gut is an open tube that's exposed to the outside world. No other part of your body is. So, mouth to anus is completely exposed to the outside world. So, think of that and think about what you're putting in there, right? Directly. So, directly, and it goes through a very significant series of processes starting with the upper gut, with breaking down food, structurally degradation into your nutrients. But there's a whole intricate process needed, starting from the saliva, which is an enzyme, has an enzyme, and to your stomach, which has acid production, hopefully, to your bile coming in from your gallbladder, meeting into the small intestine, and then the small intestine has a role, and then your colon has a role, and then your rectum has a role to store everything before you excrete. So, I mean, that's all I was trained on. Okay, I mean that's not all, but that's until we figured out the microbiome. And now, I mean, medicine has changed. And yes, there's so much we don't know, but there's a whole ecosystem, right? Um, that is at play in our gut and has to do with so many things. Fuel for the colon cells is from butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid that comes from the interaction with gut bacteria with fiber from what you're eating, or polyphenols from your fruits and vegetables that are colorful, or other polyphenols. There are polyphenols elsewhere as well, and even in herbs. Speaking of, for your audience, I have a little handout on gut healing herbs and spices. There's a special link I can give you that your readers or audience can have. But those are some of those, foods that help with gut health. What else can I say? I mean, gosh, there's so much I can say. And we're not even talking about the liver, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
hepatology. It's almost another area.
How important is the gut to your overall health?
It's key. It's just your upstream key. I mean, I know that cardiovascular health is our top killer of the United States. So you would think, oh, your heart obviously is very important. It is. But what is the root cause of that inflammation that's making people so susceptible to atherogenic particles? So there's so much there. That's another topic. But there's inflammation here. So we've got to address systemic inflammation, systemic hormone imbalances. Um, I think if you're not absorbing your nutrients, how else you have to be able to absorb them through the gut for them to work.
Yeah, I'm being really unfair on you by throwing in the gut at the last minute. But I think my final one on this, and look, my Let's Grow Young journey is one which I don't plan that well, to be honest. And I think I will get another episode on the gut as well. But you mentioned a list of a list that you have, and we'll share that with the listeners.
Okay.
Um, but just briefly, what are the types of foods that people should consider having to improve their gut health?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. Let's assume a person doesn't know that they don't have any GI symptoms. They're feeling good. So they're not like a classic sort of gut patient that you go to the GI doctor for. So let's assume you don't have gut symptoms. You're generally fine, feeling in your gut. You don't have, heartburn. You don't have acid reflux. You don't have bloating. You have normal bowel movements every day. You don't have constipation. So for that person, um, gut friendly foods are fiber, all kinds of fiber, and diversifying that fiber. So, root vegetables, alternating with the leafy vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables, thinking about all the colors of the rainbow, because we want those polyphenols in the red bell pepper and the purple eggplant and the black rice and the red beets. I mean, have at it when you're at the farmer's market. Just try to go to town and try new things, and maybe start small if you're not sure. um, Starchy vegetables can be useful as well. Again, this is all in moderation too. It's not like I want you to eat a whole plate of sweet potatoes. That's not great. um, so the idea is variety, diversity, um, of plant foods, because those are the ones that generally have most fiber, uh, and the different types of fiber: insoluble fiber, soluble fiber, and resistant starch. Those are different classes. So that's one kind of big category. Hydration is very important, very, very important. Um, polyphenols, which I already covered with what I was talking about. But some of those herbs and spices, like even dried herbs, are profound. Cinnamon is wonderful. Marjoram, rosemary. These are actually have bioactive components in them. Sulforaphane containing vegetables. Those can be hard for people that have gut issues. People will say, "Oh, I get bloated when I eat cauliflower," or "I get bloated when I eat broccoli," and you have to transition into them, or you have to figure out what's going on and why what's going on, why you're out of balance, why are you getting bloated. They're, like I said, address the root cause, ask the why. But generally, those are sulforaphane containing vegetables that are very upstream key bioactives, triggering biochemistry pathways that I can't repeat out right now, but really help with nerve 2 activation upstream. And that is key in an anti-inflammatory pathway. And some people need a little bit more of those components, depending on what their health status is or their genetics.
Okay.
Genomics,
That's
I should say.
yep. That's been
I'm sure I'm missing some categories here, but that's off the top of my head. Oh, and
that's
protein,
pretty impressive.
protein, all of those matter too. Fats, good quality fats. So, every macro matters.
Okay.
That should be
Well,
a key phrase. Every macro matters.
there we go. Every macro matters. I've actually always been pretty good on my macros. It's the micros that I've been weak on,
They're hard.
and I
Yeah.
think for me,
Yeah.
getting my my vitamins D3, K2, and that sort of stuff
Yes. Yes.
has
And don't
has,
forget the
has
fish
really
oil. It's unclear to me right now why we have such a deficiency when we measure people's omega index or fatty acid index, even when they're eating fish. So can take a while to figure out, okay, you're eating fish, salmon 3 times a week, but your omegas are not high. So we think there's going to be more coming out with genetic SNPs that we find out, because that pathway for fatty acid conversion is really complicated. We have to memorize that pathway for our functional medicine certification,
yeah.
and it's got so many enzymes, and there are genetic SNPs for some of those, but I don't know that they're not validated yet, perhaps, with enough
Yeah.
evidence. So not anything you can test for that I know of
Okay.
or do something about.
Shefali, that's been an amazing conversation. Is there anything which in this time that we've had that you would really like to cover, but we haven't? I know there's things that we want to go deeper into later at some other point. But is there anything that you would really like to get out there, which we haven't been able to cover in the last 57 minutes?
I would caution people with supplements, I guess, in the sense of be careful where you get them, consider how much you're spending on them, and take that cost and compare it to the cost of the food as medicine route. Because it might be that you're spending more on the supplements than you would be on a personal chef. I don't know. I mean, urolithin A is amazing, but it's very expensive.
Stopped.
But
I've stopped taking it.
yeah,
Because
no,
for that reason,
again, I have no bias towards or against supplements. I just think it depends on you. You might benefit from the urolithin A, and it might be easier to do that than do all the other things. So, but again, caution where you get it from, and make sure someone's guiding you and looking, just someone that's personally guiding you on your supplement curation. We curate the supplement pantry in our practice.
okay, that's absolutely amazing. So I think, to be honest, to conclude, what I've heard you talk about today is things which I am really, really passionate about. And the reason I'm passionate about is we didn't get a chance to talk about GLP-1 in much detail today,
That's right. That's right.
and Wegovy and Ozempic. I recently was asked to contribute to a national newspaper, around the effects of Wegovy. And to me, I'm not going to switch this conversation to Wegovy, but the starting point for every human being are the things that are in your control. And a overly sponsored biohacker will preach about this supplement, that supplement, this treatment, that treatment. But the fact of the matter is, most of the things that you've talked about are in your hands, right? It's the food that you source, it's the exercise that you do, it is the access to the sun. To me, that's not that expensive. You may choose to source food yourselves. That is a little bit more expensive, but you reduce it by reducing your supplements. So I think what you've talked about is amazing, and I encourage everyone to find those doctors who are moving into functional medicine. And look, personally, if I find a doctor who's got an Eastern kind of culture as well, to me that's a win-win-win,
Yeah.
because because all this stuff about vegetables, turmeric, anti-inflammatory products. My mum has been staying with us for the last week, and today she made something, and I said, "Mum, that's got too much cinnamon in it." And her words to me were, "It's good for you."
There
And
you
so,
go.
so for people who've come from that culture, who've become doctors, who've lived in the Western world, who are now coming back to all of this through functional medicine, I think it's amazing, and that's why I
Yeah.
think people like
Listen to
you
our
should be
mothers,
on platforms.
yeah, all the things
Well,
like
not always. I don't think you should
not
always
always,
listen to
but I mean, my mom is very different than me in our personality. So she's very much about being in the present. She's very anti-longevity, if you will. It's very interesting because she's like, I'm happy and content with what I have today, and I'm going to enjoy what I want to enjoy now, even though some of the choices are not to my liking. It's fascinating. This is where personality matters. And I have to comment on the GLP-1 because I can't hang up with you without. I think we might differ on this. Um, I think there's a role for the right person done the right way. It has to be a really holistic program.
Yeah,
And we also need to be thinking about how these medications might be working aside from weight. Okay.
yeah.
Um, in other doses. So that are not FDA approved for obesity here. So there's just so much we don't know, and we don't have time to talk about it. But also remember that GLP-1 is made in the gut, but we have receptors all over the body. So again, it's tying back to the gut. It doesn't mean that someone that's had lifelong obesity or someone that has gained a significant bit of weight that is so distressful to them that they have anxiety, etc. We can't always just say no. We have to get asking the why. Okay. So
100%.
there's so much more I could say about this. So another time.
No, we're not going to disagree on it. I actually agree with you on it. I think
Oh,
I
okay.
think just to give you some context to that, I was asked by a national newspaper a couple of weeks ago what my thoughts were on a already underweight lady who
Oh,
has become chronically ill,
okay.
pancreatic issues, thyroid issues, after going on to Wegovy. And my
Okay.
comments in the newspaper, and you can read them on the Daily Mirror, were exactly in line with what you said, which is
Okay.
that there's a place for it. You look at BMI. Ozempic has been around for years, been used for diabetes. If you are obese, and it's affecting your quality of life, you have to look at the risk rewards. And at the end
That's
of the
right.
day, you can't say it's good or bad. You just can't. In this
Perfect. Yeah.
particular example, that I saw, um, it was being used in the wrong way. But even the people who use it in the right way, you then need to look at what their relationship with food was for. If they suddenly cannot get access to the food that they wanted, do they understand that that may be a sub impact?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm totally with you.
Okay.
And I
I'll
think
I'll I'll
I
read
wanted
that.
to
I'll read that.
clarify
Send
that
that
as
to
well.
me.
Yeah, no worries. Amazing. Shefali, how do people find you? How do people find
Yeah,
you?
we are on social media on all the channels at Precision Gut Health. So Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. Our website is precisionguthealth.com. It's just undergoing a renovation. So as of today, it's not live, but it'll be live in a couple of weeks. So you'll see the old website currently, which was Precision Metabolic Health. Again, I changed the name because too many syllables, but it's the same practice. And you can email our office, and that is info@precisionguthealth.com if you are interested in setting up a complimentary consult call if you are in the state of Texas. If you are outside the state of Texas, we have some ways that we can help as well.
Okay, superb. Thank you, Shefali, for
Thank you
joining.
so much. I love talking to you. This is great.
To
Yeah.
have you.
Yeah.
Don't hang up.
Thanks for having your
Yeah.
podcast and doing what you do.
No worries. Don't hang up just yet.
Okay.
Don't hang
Yes,
up.
I remember that.
I'm gonna hit the stop button and it's gonna tell me when it's uploaded.
Okay.
So yeah.